My HOA gave me a 300-page rulebook. Page 47, my pink flamingo is illegal, $50 a day fine. Page 112, my lime green door, also banned. And the president? She's marching up my driveway with the book like it's the Bible. But here's the twist. I've read every single page. And I'm ready to play by their rules, in the most unexpected way. It all started, as most of my questionable life decisions do, with a moment of pure, unadulterated late-night frustration. I was scrolling through neighborhood forums online, a digital space where one usually goes to find a reliable plumber or complain about people not picking up after their dogs. But I fell down a rabbit hole, a deep, dark, digital rabbit hole filled with harrowing tales of HOA tyranny. I was utterly captivated. I read stories of people getting fined because their trash cans were left at the curb for an extra 5 minutes past the designated collection window. Homeowners are being forced by committee decree to dig up their own prize-winning rose bushes because they weren't on the approved foliage list. One poor guy in Arizona got a cease and desist letter for flying a flag of his favorite sports team, which the board deemed non-neutral and potentially divisive. The sheer, breathtaking absurdity of it all was more compelling than any thriller novel could be. It's a peculiar, uniquely suburban form of authoritarianism. A tiny, self-contained kingdom ruled by a board of volunteers who, having no real power in the outside world, wield their little bit of neighborhood authority with the fury of a deposed monarch. They create these massive, quasi-legal documents, these covenants, conditions, and restrictions, or CC&Rs, that dictate every conceivable aspect of your life. They do it all under the noble-sounding guise of protecting property values. But the more I read, the clearer it became that this was less about property values and more about control. It was about enforcing a single, monotonous, uninspired vision of what a perfect neighborhood should look like. It was about ensuring that no house, no yard, no person dared to stand out. And then somewhere in the 4th hour of my deep dive, a thought sparked in my mind. It was a dangerous, expensive, and the most stupid idea I've ever had. What if someone fought back? Not by writing angry, grammatically questionable emails to the board or by complaining impotently at the sparsely attended monthly meetings. What if someone treated the entire system as the elaborate, farcical joke it so clearly is? What if someone intentionally, methodically, and joyfully created a property that was a living, breathing monument to non-compliance? A house that was a direct, calculated, and artistically rendered insult to every single one of their pedantic, soul-crushing rules. The idea took root in my brain and began to grow like a weed in a perfectly manicured lawn. This wasn't just about trolling. It was a social experiment. How would an organization built on a foundation of absolute conformity react to a deliberate, joyful act of rebellion? How would the neighborhood enforcer, the inevitable Karen figure who exists at the heart of every HOA horror story, handle a situation that wasn't just an accidental violation, but a declaration of war fought with bad taste and a smile? So my mission began, my quixotic quest. I had to find the strictest, most notoriously aggressive HOA in the entire region. I spent weeks of my life on this singular goal. I became a connoisseur of neighborhood covenants. I talked to countless real estate agents who would nervously laugh and issue warnings. "Oh," one said, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow, "you don't want to live there. They measure the grass with a ruler." That's when I knew I was on the right track. And finally, after weeks of searching, I found it. The estates at Serenity Meadows. The name alone was a colossal red flag. It sounded less like a neighborhood and more like a high-security retirement community where happiness goes to die. Their rulebook was the stuff of local legend. The real estate agent assigned to the property handled the binder with the reverence and dread usually reserved for a nuclear launch code briefcase. He handed it to me with a look of pure, unadulterated pity. It was a thick, white, 3-ring binder, literally 300 pages thick, filled with regulations so specific they crossed the line from oppressive into the realm of high comedy. I took it home, poured a large glass of whiskey, and read it cover to cover, as if it were the year's most anticipated bestseller. It was even better, even more absurd than I had dared to imagine. Rule 4.2. All front-facing doors must be painted in one of the three pre-approved shades from the Sherwin-Williams Suburban Collection: Desert Taupe, Subtle Fawn, or Gentle Almond. Gentle Almond. They actually named a paint color Gentle Almond. The sheer audacity. Rule 7.8. No artificial lawn ornamentation of any kind is permitted. This includes, but is not limited to, statuary, spheres, figurines, animal or humanoid, and especially plastic flamingos. They called out flamingos by name. They knew their enemy. This wasn't just a rule. It was a scar from a past battle. Rule 11.3. Mail receptacles must be the classic standard mailbox, Model 4B, as approved by the Architectural Review Committee. No modifications, personalizations, or creative alterations of any kind are permitted. They even specified the model number. The dedication to uniformity was almost admirable in its thoroughness. There were rules about the maximum height of your grass, 3 inches, the minimum number of shrubs you had to have in your front flower bed, 5, with a maximum height of 24 inches, the exact angle and material of your driveway, and a Byzantine clause prohibiting holiday decorations from being displayed a single day before Thanksgiving. There was a rule forbidding basketball hoops from being visible from the street. Another rule dictated that garage doors could not be left open for more than 60 consecutive minutes. It was a masterpiece of micromanagement, a breathtaking testament to the tyranny of the mundane. I had found my canvas. The house itself was perfect. A boring, builder-grade beige box, a 2-story vessel of suburban ennui, indistinguishable from every other house on the block. It was a blank slate, a perfectly compliant backdrop, just waiting for a splash of glorious, weaponized chaos. The previous owners were an elderly couple who, for 20 long years, had followed every rule to the letter. The house was so deeply, profoundly compliant that it was practically invisible. The day I closed the deal, I felt this massive, exhilarating surge of adrenaline. The agent, after signing the last paper, looked at me, shook his head slowly, and said, "Good luck. You're going to need it." He had no idea this was the entire point. I wasn't buying a house. I was buying a front-row ticket to the main event. The keys were cold and sharp in my hand. The beige box, a monument to a life of quiet desperation, was all mine. It was time to get to work. I decided to approach this not as a prank, but as a work of art, an installation piece. Each violation would be a deliberate brushstroke, a calculated act of aesthetic terrorism designed to chip away at the very foundation of Serenity Meadows methodically. First on the agenda was the front door. It was currently painted a thrilling shade of subtle fawn, a color so bland it seemed to absorb light and joy from its surroundings. According to the sacred texts on page 112, my only other approved options were Desert Taupe, and those above Gentle Almond. So I made a pilgrimage to the local hardware store. I wandered the paint aisle, a kaleidoscope of infinite possibilities, looking for the single most offensive color I could legally purchase. I bypassed the sensible navies and the respectable forest greens. I needed something that didn't just whisper rebellion. I needed a color that screamed, "A rule died here." And then I saw it, tucked away in a corner reserved for colors that good taste forgot. A can of paint labeled nuclear lime. It was a highlighter green so bright it felt loud, a shade of green that occurs nowhere in nature. It was perfect. I spent an entire Saturday with a roll of painter's tape, a roller, and a deep sense of purpose. The few neighbors who walked or drove by did a double take. A few offered a tight, nervous little smile, the kind you give a strange dog you hope isn't aggressive. They knew I was breaking the sacred covenant. As the first coat went on, the door transformed from a symbol of oppressive conformity into a radiant beacon of rebellion. When I was done, it was glorious. It was a searing, unapologetic slash of color in a vast, unending sea of beige. You can see it from space. I stood back on the lawn, hands on my hips, just admiring my work. Violation number 1 was complete. It was a direct, unambiguous violation of Rule 4.2, and it was a beautiful sight. Next up, the lawn. Page 47, Rule 7.8. The explicit ban on lawn ornaments, with a special hateful shout-out to the humble pink flamingo. This wasn't just a rule. It was a challenge. They had thrown down the gauntlet, and I was going to pick it up and smack them across the face with it. I didn't just want one flamingo. One flamingo is a misdemeanor. It's for amateurs. I wanted a felony. I wanted a flock, an army, a plastic pink invasion force. I went online and found a bulk supplier of lawn and garden novelties. I ordered 50 of them. 50 plastic flamingos with slender metal legs. 2 days later, a massive, surprisingly heavy box arrived on my doorstep. I felt like a revolutionary general receiving a clandestine shipment of weapons. That evening, under the conspiratorial cover of twilight, I began my operation. I didn't just stick them randomly in the grass. That would be artless. I arranged them. I created a scene, a diorama of defiance. I had some in a phalanx formation, marching inexorably toward the street. I had a few arranged in a tight circle as if they were plotting a coup. I positioned one right by the mailbox, standing guard like a sentinel. I even had 2 near the front porch, their heads bent together, seemingly whispering secrets to each other. It was a fever dream of kitsch, a glorious, tacky, magnificent spectacle. My boring beige lawn had been transformed overnight into the official staging ground for the Flamingo Liberation Front. The effect was immediate. Every time a car drove by my house, it would slow to a crawl, the driver's head turning as if drawn by a magnet. Their face a perfect mask of confusion, concern, and perhaps a little grudging admiration. They weren't just looking at flamingos. They were looking at anarchy made manifest in cheap plastic. The Architectural Review Committee had been painfully, excruciatingly clear on page 153. Classic standard mailbox. Model 4B. A simple black metal box on a wooden post, utterly devoid of personality, creativity, or joy. Rule 11.3 expressly forbade any creative alterations. So, naturally, I got creative. Now, I'm not a professional sculptor, but I do know my way around a welding torch and have a healthy disregard for my own safety. I bought a standard issue Model 4B mailbox to say I technically started with the approved equipment, and then I got to work in my garage. I spent a weekend surrounded by sparks and the smell of hot metal, cutting and welding sheets of steel. Slowly, painstakingly, a new form began to take shape over the mundane black box. A long serpentine neck, a horned head with a gaping, toothy maw, a pair of jagged, menacing wings. By Sunday evening, I had transformed the boring Model 4B into a magnificent 4-foot-tall silver and black dragon. The mail slot was its hungry mouth. The little red flag was attached to the tip of one of its wings. Installing it was a moment of pure, unadulterated joy. I had to dig a new, deeper hole and set the post in concrete to support the weight of my metallic beast. I bolted it to the post, tightened the last screw, and stepped back to admire my creation. It was utterly, completely, and gloriously non-compliant. It looked like a creature from a fantasy novel had crash-landed in the middle of suburbia to guard my junk mail and credit card offers. It was a direct, 3-dimensional middle finger to the Architectural Review Committee. It was art. It was a violation. It was perfect. The landscaping rules were a whole novel unto themselves, a botanical horror story. Page 82 specified that lawns must be mowed weekly and not exceed 3 inches in height. Page 85 had an exhaustive list of approved ground cover, which was mostly a collection of uninspired, boring bushes that wouldn't offend anyone. My lawn was a pristine carpet of Kentucky bluegrass, mowed to precisely 2.75 inches by the previous owner. It was a green desert. It was time for nature to reclaim some territory. First, I just stopped mowing for 2 weeks. The grass, freed from its weekly haircut, shot up with a vengeance. It reached a lush 4, then 5 inches. It began to look alive and untamed, much to the horror of my immediate neighbors, whose lawns looked like golf course greens. Then, I visited a local nursery and purchased a dozen packets of wildflower seeds. Not the neat, tidy, domesticated kind. I'm talking the chaotic meadow-in-a-can mix, a beautiful anarchic blend of native and non-native species. I spent a pleasant afternoon wandering my front lawn, sprinkling them liberally all over, right in between the marching flamingos. Within a couple of weeks, the magic started to happen. Little sprouts of anonymous green turned into a riot of untamed color. Bright red poppies, brilliant blue cornflowers, and sunny yellow daisies began popping up, interspersed with the long, flowing blades of overgrown grass. It was a chaotic, beautiful mess. It looked less like a suburban lawn and more like a painter's palette that had been left out in the rain. It flew in the face of the manicured, sterile golf course perfection the HOA demanded. It wasn't just grass. It was a statement. It was a tiny, thriving ecosystem of defiance, buzzing with bees and butterflies, growing right in the heart of Serenity Meadows. My final masterpiece. The cherry on top of this sundae of subversion was the holiday decoration rule. Page 210 was explicit. No seasonal or holiday-themed decorations may be erected before the Friday following Thanksgiving Day or remain past 15 January. It was currently the middle of July. The sun was beating down. The air was thick with humidity, and the sound of distant lawnmowers filled the air. It was, I decided, the perfect time to celebrate Halloween. I ordered 2 full-size posable skeletons online. When they arrived, I named them Bartholomew and Beatrice. They were my new roommates. I set them up on my front porch in a pair of comfortable lawn chairs, holding empty cocktail glasses with little paper umbrellas. I put a jaunty pirate hat on Bartholomew and a wide-brimmed sun hat on Beatrice. They were chilling, 2 skeletal specters on summer vacation, enjoying the oppressive heat 5 months too early. To complete the scene, I hung a string of orange and purple bat-shaped lights around the porch railing and placed a large, grinning, plastic jack-o'-lantern on the steps between them. The whole tableau was an exercise in pure temporal absurdity. It completely shattered the seasonal flow of the neighborhood. While everyone else was thinking about barbecues and pool parties, my house was a spooky little oasis in October. It was a violation of time itself, the ultimate thumb in the eye to their rigid, joy-sucking schedule. My house was no longer a beige box. It was a living gallery of dissent, a museum of infractions. And now all I had to do was wait. It didn't take long. The first sign that the hive had been disturbed was subtle yet unmistakable. A white sedan, the kind of boring, sensible vehicle that seems to be standard issue for HOA board members everywhere, started making slow, deliberate passes down my street. It would pause for a long moment directly in front of my house, a shadowy silhouette visible behind the wheel, before continuing its joyless patrol. This happened 3 times in a single day. I was officially under surveillance. I was outside, making a minor adjustment to a flamingo's head that had begun to list to one side, when I saw a curtain twitch in the house directly across the street. A face peered out, eyes wide, then quickly vanished as soon as I looked in its direction. The word was spreading through the neighborhood telegraph. The great disturbance in the beige force was being noted, discussed, and judged. I felt a genuine thrill. The experiment was working perfectly. They weren't just seeing a collection of random violations. They were seeing a pattern. They were seeing intent. And it was confusing and frightening them. 2 days after Bartholomew and Beatrice took up their permanent summer residence on my porch, I found it. Tucked neatly and aggressively under my car's driver-side wiper blade was a crisp, white, business-sized envelope. It wasn't a friendly, welcome to the neighborhood note with a coupon for a local pizzeria. It featured the HOA's official logo in the top left corner, a serene-looking tree within a perfect, unbroken circle. The irony was just delicious. My heart beat a little faster as I pulled it out and opened it. The paper was thick and expensive. This was it, a formal notice of violation. My name and address were at the top, followed by a cold, bulleted list of my sins. I read it aloud, right there in my driveway, my voice dripping with mock solemnity for an imaginary audience. Dear homeowner, an inspection of your property on 17th of July has revealed several violations of the covenants, conditions, and restrictions of the estates at Serenity Meadows. The following issues require your immediate attention. Oh, this was good. This was poetry. Unapproved exterior color application, violation of Rule 4.2. The front door of the residence has been painted a non-approved color. Please repaint the door using one of the approved shades from the designated palette within 14 days of the date of this notice. 2. Prohibited lawn ornamentation. Violation of Rule 7.8. Multiple plastic figurines, flamingos, have been placed on the front lawn. Please remove all prohibited items from the property immediately. 3. Non-compliant mail receptacle. Violation of Rule 11.3. The installed mailbox is a non-standard custom model. Please replace it with the approved classic standard mailbox. Model 4B within 14 days. 4. Failure to maintain landscaping standards. Violation of Rule 6.1. The lawn exceeds the maximum allowable height of 3 inches. Furthermore, unapproved flora, wildflowers, have been introduced. Please mow the lawn to the appropriate height and remove the non-native plants. Unseasonal decorations. Violation of Rule 15.5. Holiday-themed decorations, skeletons, lights are being displayed outside the permitted seasonal time frame. Please remove them immediately. The letter concluded with a paragraph of beautifully crafted, thinly veiled threats regarding the levying of fines starting at $50 per violation per day and the potential placement of a lien on your property if compliance was not achieved. It was signed, "Sincerely, the Serenity Meadows Architectural Review Committee." I laughed out loud. A bark of pure delight. It was so perfectly, beautifully predictable. The sterile, formal language, the arbitrary deadlines, the immediate jump to financial penalties. This wasn't a letter from a neighbor asking for a bit of consideration. It was a demand from a petty, bureaucratic tyrant. They thought this piece of paper would scare me. They thought I would panic, rush out to buy a can of gentle almond paint, and spend my weekend digging up flamingos. They had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with. This letter wasn't a threat. It was a receipt. It was tangible proof of my success. I folded it up carefully, put it in my back pocket, walked over to my flamingo army, and adjusted one of them to be a few inches closer to my neighbor's property line. Then I went inside, sat down at my computer, and ordered a dozen garden gnomes. The escalation had just begun. All right, this is where it gets real. The first shot has been officially fired. The HOA has sent its formal, threatening warning, listing every single one of my alleged violations, and they're discussing fines and legal action. They think I'm going to fold. They think I'm going to surrender and paint my beautiful door a soul-crushing shade of beige. But you and I both know that is not going to happen. In fact, a shipment of 12 assorted garden gnomes is on its way to the front lines as we speak. If you want to see the moment when Karen, the HOA president herself, finally confronts me, and you want to see the look on her face when she realizes this was all a deliberate, calculated plan, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on all notifications. Because what's coming next is the main event. You do not want to miss this confrontation. The gnomes arrived a day later. They were magnificent. Classic, red-hatted, bearded little guys with cheerful, slightly vacant expressions. I immediately set about integrating them into the existing flamingo army. Some I had riding the flamingos like brave cavalrymen charging into battle. One I placed perched triumphantly on the horned head of my mailbox dragon. It was a beautiful, surreal new layer of calculated chaos. And I knew, with a profound certainty in my soul, that this final act of gleeful defiance would be the thing that summoned her. Sending a formal letter is one thing, but being pointedly ignored and then having the problem worsen demonstrably? That's not just a violation. That's a direct insult to a person like Karen. That's a fundamental attack on her authority and her entire reason for being. And I was right. It was a Saturday morning. The sun was bright, the sky was a deep, cloudless blue. I was outside, pretending to water the riotous wildflowers, my stage perfectly set. The same white sedan I had seen on patrol pulled up and parked directly in front of my house, angled slightly as if it had stopped in a hurry. The driver's side door opened, and she emerged. It was exactly as I had pictured, as if I had cast her for this role myself. She was probably in her late 50s, with a perfectly coiffed helmet of blonde hair that looked like it could withstand a Category 4 hurricane. She wore a pressed, pastel pink pantsuit, the unofficial uniform of women across the nation who demand to speak to the manager. And in her right hand she clutched the sacred binder, the rulebook. She wasn't just bringing it for reference. She was getting it as a prop, a scepter, a symbol of her power and righteousness. She marched up my driveway, her low heels clicking on the concrete with a rhythmic, purposeful cadence. Her face was a storm cloud of pure, unadulterated indignation. She stopped about 10 feet away from me, her eyes doing a slow, contemptuous scan of the scene of the crime. She looked from the nuclear lime door to the skeletons on the porch, to the chaotic flamingo and gnome army, to the majestic dragon mailbox, and finally, to me. Her lip curled into a visible sneer. "Are you the new owner of this property?" she asked, her voice as sharp and brittle as a shard of glass. I gave her my most pleasant, slightly clueless, "Who, me?" smile. "I am. Just moved in. Can you believe this weather? Beautiful day, isn't it?" Her eyes narrowed to tiny slits. She was not here for small talk about the weather. "I am the president of the Homeowners Association for the Estates at Serenity Meadows." She said the full name as if it were the title of a holy ground, a place I had just desecrated. "Oh, the HOA, what a pleasure to finally meet you in person," I said with genuine enthusiasm. Wiping my hands on my pants and extending one for a handshake she had no intention of accepting. She just stared at my outstretched hand until I awkwardly let it drop. "We sent you a notice," she snapped, her voice tight. "A notice? A letter? Oh, you mean this?" I said, pulling the crumpled, well-read letter from my back pocket. "Yeah, I got this the other day. I have to say, it's a bit formal for a welcome note, don't you think?" I chuckled to myself. She did not. "That is a formal notice of violation," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of condescension reserved for misbehaving children. "It clearly lists as of this morning, it's now 6 separate and distinct violations of the community covenants. And you have done nothing. In fact, you have made it worse." She gestured angrily at a newly placed gnome who was cheerfully fishing in a bird bath I'd added the day before. "Oh, him? That's Gerald. Do you like him? I thought he added a nice touch of whimsy," I asked innocently. This broke her. The thin facade of controlled, bureaucratic anger just cracked and fell away. "This is not a joke!" she shrieked, her voice suddenly climbing an octave. "This neighborhood has standards. We have rules that every single resident agrees to follow to protect the aesthetic integrity and the property values of our community." She was in full monologue mode. The floodgates had opened. "This was it. Your door," she began, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger, "is a flagrant violation of Rule 4.2. It is a garish, offensive color that completely disrupts the harmonious visual flow of the street." "Harmonious visual flow," I repeated, nodding thoughtfully as if considering the concept for the first time. "That sounds very important. These things," she spat, waving a hand dismissively at my glorious flamingo army, "are expressly forbidden by Rule 7.8. They are tacky. They are low class. They bring down the entire tone of the neighborhood. This is an upscale community, not a trailer park." "I don't know. I think they have a certain retro charm," I offered gently. "Your mailbox is a monstrosity," she continued, her voice rising with every word. "The Architectural Review Committee exists for the sole purpose of preventing eyesores like that. And your lawn? It's a public disgrace. It looks like an unkempt, weed-infested field. When one house looks bad, it reflects poorly on all of us. It actively lowers our property values." She was pacing back and forth on my driveway now, clutching the binder to her chest like a shield. "And the skeletons. It is the middle of July. What is wrong with you? Are you deliberately trying to antagonize us? Do you think the rules that everyone else follows don't apply to you?" She finally stopped her pacing, planting herself directly in front of me, her eyes blazing with righteous fury. "I am giving you one final warning. You will rectify every single one of these violations by the end of the week. You will repaint that door. You will remove this trash from your lawn. You will install the proper committee-approved mailbox. You will mow your lawn, and you will take down those ridiculous skeletons. If you do not, the fines will begin, and they will not stop. We will fine you $50 per day per violation. That's $300 a day. We will put a lien on your house. We will foreclose on this property if necessary. We have done it before, and we will do it again. Do you understand me?" She stood there, breathing heavily, her face flushed with the exertion of her own power. She had laid down the law. She had made the ultimate threat. She expected me to crumble, to apologize, to beg for forgiveness. I let the silence hang in the air for a long, delicious moment. I looked at her, then at my beautiful, chaotic house. I looked at Bartholomew and Beatrice, chilling on the porch as if they didn't have a care in the world. I looked at Gerald the gnome, forever fishing. Then I looked back at Karen, my clueless, vacant smile faded, replaced by a calm, steady, and straightforward gaze. "Oh, I think there's been a profound misunderstanding," I said, my voice suddenly quiet and even. She blinked, the shift in my tone throwing her off balance. "What?" "You see, I read the rulebook," I said, tapping my temple with my index finger. "All 300 pages of it. I read it cover to cover before making an offer on this house. I read Rule 4.2 about the requirement to use gentle almond paint. I read Rule 7.8, the one that specifically and fearfully outlaws plastic flamingos. I read Rule 11.3 about your very special particular Model 4B mailbox." I took a single step closer to her. Her bravado flickered for a second, replaced by a wave of visible confusion. "I didn't violate those rules by accident, Karen," I said softly, letting the name hang in the air. "I bought this house because of the rules. I bought this house specifically and intentionally to break them. All of them. I wanted to see what would happen. I wanted to document the experience of what happens when someone deliberately and publicly refuses to conform to a 300-page manual on how to be boring." I gestured vaguely toward a small, dark spot in a front window, where a camera was discreetly placed. "And by the way," I added, giving her a bright, wide, toothy smile, "you're on camera. The whole world is going to get to see this priceless reaction." The transformation was instant, and it was magnificent. It was like watching a computer program encounter a fatal error and crash in real time. The righteous anger on Karen's face didn't just fade. It dissolved, replaced by a wave of utter, slack-jawed, sputtering disbelief. Her brain, so accustomed to a world of compliance and infractions, could not process the concepts of intentional and public. These inputs did not compute. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, but no sound came out. It was a perfect silent movie-style sputter. The hand that had been clutching the sacred binder with such conviction went limp, and the book of rules, her holy text, dropped from her grasp. It landed on the driveway with a dull, heavy thud. That sound, more than anything, symbolized her complete and total defeat. Her weapon was useless. The rules only have power if both parties agree to play the game. I had just flipped the whole table over. You what?" She finally managed to stammer, her voice a weak, powerless whisper. All the fire was gone, replaced by a cold, horrified confusion. She looked like she had just seen a ghost. "I'm conducting a social experiment," I explained calmly, my voice maintaining its even tone. "An exploration of personal expression versus restrictive community covenants. And you, my dear, are the star of the show. Your performance so far has been fantastic, by the way. A plus, truly. You really hit all the key phrases. Property values, aesthetic integrity, we've done it before. Just perfect. Couldn't have written it better myself." She just stared at me, her eyes darting from my face to the camera in the window and back again. The neat little world of rules and enforcement that she ruled over with an iron fist had been shattered into a million pieces. I hadn't just broken her rules, I had invalidated the entire game. She was a hall monitor in a school that had just been declared a permanent, unscheduled holiday. Her authority was a phantom. That's insane," she stammered, gesturing weakly at the house, then at me, then at nothing at all. She looked like she was about to short-circuit. She tried to find her anger again, to reignite that righteous fire, but it was gone. The fuel had run out. All that was left was a deflated, utterly bewildered woman standing in the middle of my driveway next to her fallen rulebook. Slowly, with the movements of someone much older, she bent down and picked up the binder, dusting it off like a fallen comrade. She clutched it to her chest, but this time it looked less like a symbol of power and more like a life raft in a sea of chaos she couldn't comprehend. She gave me one last look, a complex, toxic cocktail of hatred, fear, and complete soul-deep incomprehension. Then, without another word, she turned and scurried back to her car. Her purposeful, authoritative march was now a hasty, undignified retreat. She didn't just walk away. She fled. I watched her get into her white sedan, fumble with the keys for a moment, and then speed off down the street, leaving a faint cloud of dust and shattered authority in her wake. I stood there for a long moment in the sudden silence, a slow, wide grin spreading across my face. It was even better than I had hoped. The shock, the speechless defeat. It was the perfect payoff. I had held up a mirror to the sheer absurdity of her position, and she couldn't stand the reflection. But as I watched her car disappear around the corner, I knew this wasn't the end. This was just the end of Act 1. Her priceless reaction was just the beginning. I hadn't truly defeated the HOA. I had just deeply, personally, and very publicly embarrassed its queen. And people like Karen don't just walk away. They don't give up. They regroup. They escalate. They call lawyers. They declare war. My little social experiment was about to enter a whole new, much more expensive phase. And sure enough, a week later, the next move arrived. It wasn't another note tucked under my wiper blade. It wasn't the white sedan making menacing patrols. It was a stiff, formal letter delivered by certified mail, requiring a signature. The mail carrier gave me a knowing look. The return address wasn't the estates at Serenity Meadows HOA. It was a prestigious high-rise law firm located downtown. So, to recap, a single lime green door, a small but brave army of plastic birds and gnomes, a dragon guarding my mail, and a few cheerful skeletons celebrating Halloween in July were enough to cause a complete and total meltdown in the president of my HOA. Karen came armed with rules and threats of fines and foreclosure, and she left in a state of sputtering existential shock after I revealed my master plan. It was, I have to admit, a perfect day. However, the game has now changed. This is no longer just me versus Karen and her little binder. Now, it's me versus the lawyers. The HOA has officially lawyered up. Inside this very official-looking, very threatening envelope is, I am almost sure, a professionally drafted cease letter, probably filled with a lot of scary legal jargon designed to intimidate me into submission. And this is where you come in. What should I do next? In my view, I have two distinct options. Option A, I double down. I'm talking about a full-scale escalation, a moat filled with more plastic flamingos, gargoyles on the roofline, painting the entire house in rainbow stripes. We abandon all pretense of subtlety and go to full-scale aesthetic warfare. Or, option B, the malicious compliance route. I go through that 300-page rulebook with a fine-toothed comb and find every single loophole, every contradiction, every poorly worded rule. I exploit them most creatively and annoyingly possible. For example, if the rules state the grass can't be taller than 3 inches, I might consider getting it professionally cut to exactly 2.9 inches and painting it blue, since the rules only specify height, not color. Please share your most diabolical ideas in the comments below. Which path should I choose? Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to help me craft the next chapter of this ridiculous saga. And make sure you're subscribed with all notifications turned on, because for part 2, we are going to be unboxing this letter from their high-priced lawyers. You won't want to miss what happens next. Thanks for watching and for supporting the good fight against Gentle Almond. We'll see you in the next one.